guys, welcome to the very first podcast for ADHD Ireland, hosted by me, Lauren McBride, or Her Thoughts in Bright Colours on Instagram. I hope we're all well. Over the course of this podcast, we're going to discuss all aspects of ADHD in an honest way, as we have lived with ADHD our whole lives. Some of us were diagnosed sooner than later, and some of us aren't diagnosed formally at all. This gives a wide variety of experiences from all different perspectives. Please listen at your own discretion, as we are coming from a place of personal experiences. Some topics may be sensitive to listeners, so please be advised that our opinions and lives may not directly correlate with your experiences living with ADHD. During these podcasts, people living with ADHD or who have experience with ADHD in their familial, platonic or romantic relationships will be joining me over Zoom. Thank you to everyone who is and will be involved. We couldn't do it without you. I'm super excited to be hosting this podcast. Thank you to ADHD Ireland for giving me the opportunity to do something that I love. And with that, let's chat. Hi everybody, and welcome to the third episode of Let's Chat ADHD. This is a recording with ADHD Ireland, and my name is Lauren McBride, or Her Thoughts and Bright Colours on Instagram. If anybody is listening, please listen at your own discretion. If you are uncomfortable with any of the topics, please be wary of that because it's unfiltered. We're talking about personal experiences, and yeah, we're happy to have everybody. So hi everyone.
Hi.
Hiya.
Today's topic kind of came to me with the help of Beta from ADHD Ireland, and we're basically thinking about the different ways that ADHD negatively and positively affects us in previous podcasts. And something that came to my mind was before and during and after diagnosis, I feel like my ADHD plays such a role in my life that it definitely affects relationships in various ways. I interact with people very differently maybe than some people, and also sometimes in relationships romantically, emotional dysregulation would be a huge thing for me. So it just kind of came to my mind that it was something I wanted to discuss with you guys, and maybe the listeners would find it interesting to sorry, that's my dog, to talk about. And if anybody has any issues or any ideas about this podcast, it would be great for you guys to comment on it. But yeah, my whole life has basically been knowing what was my issues, I guess, and I don't really want to come to this in a negative sense, but I wanted to make it known, I guess, and see what your guys' opinions are of how your ADHD makes you function in relationships, how your ADHD may affect relationships in positive or negative ways, and what your views are on if it even affects them at all. So does anybody have any strong opinions on this?
I think I do. Having gone through a failed marriage and then another long-term relationship breakdown, yeah, I think I can say it does. In there's two different ways, I think, as well, to look at it. I've done quite a lot of reading, and there's been quite a lot of research, I think, that came out suggesting that actually neurodivergent people often tend to like to hang about and spend time with other neurodivergent people because they understand them, which is great. But if that's the case, then of course, if you've got two people who are struggling to possibly manage emotions or stay on focus with each other, then I think it can cause a few problems. Yeah, but I think my personal experience, yes. But like with most things, some people have very successful relationships with it. So it depends, on different, like I said, with children, I mean, you carry on and you work with it anyway. So I think it just depends which type of relationship and how it fits.
Yeah, it's definitely different for all different types of relationships. And I'd love to know more about that from your stance of maybe how it was different in affecting you in maybe your marriage or your relationships, compared to maybe how we're better at adjusting when it's our children, or we're better at adjusting when it's other people rather than adjusting to ourselves, and what our needs are and our different ways of being.
Yeah, I think one of the most obvious would be that you can't just give up on your children. You keep going because you're the parent, but most of the time. Whereas with a relationship with another partner, I think you can, because especially if you don't have those ties, And I think probably the biggest one would probably be managing emotions and that very literal way of speaking. So you could say something that maybe wasn't intentionally hurtful in any shape or form, but it's misunderstood the wrong way. Or you being over anxious or worried about something, but not being able to explain exactly why to your partner. So that then causes miscommunication. I think communication is probably a big thing with the relationships which is struggling with. But yeah, and like I said, kind of focusing as well, because if you go off on, say, like a hyper focus or special interest or whatever, then yeah, you can completely zone off on one thing. And I know me, for instance, fitness, every now and then fitness comes before everything, going out on dates or anything. So I think sometimes as well, hyper focus can get lots of different ways. I think if we really pick it apart, I think there's many ways it can affect us. Organization as well, about forgetting and remembering birthdays.
Something that you said there stood out to me. You said we can't give up on our children, and that made me think of, do you think that as people who are neurodivergent, that we just need patience, that we just need someone to not give up on us?
Yeah, I think we quite often model what we've seen before when we're younger, and there's more and more as we're going, as I suppose media helps as well, and as we're starting to understand everything more, then I think we're realizing that there's more and more family links as well. So I think quite often we're like following how our parents work. If I look at my mum, I mean, God, everyone always used to joke, you're so much like your mum, you're so much like your mum. I know exactly why I'm like my mum now, because I see me in her. She doesn't accept it, of course. I can see it in certain ones of my children don't agree with diagnosis, which is a whole new thing, a whole different talk. But yeah, so I mean, I think different relationships, you can see it. And in families, I think it like I say, I think we just tend to get on with it because it's the way we've been taught. And if we've seen our parents behave or manage to get us to do things this way, then we tend to repeat that with our children. I've now learned that many of those ways probably aren't, so that, the ways that we should be doing them. So I'm trying to, do it a different way again. So it's a learning process, isn't it? That's what I've learned. Every day's a learning day.
I see some messages in the chat. I don't know if they're in relation to what you were saying. Yeah, if anybody has anything to say to that, or if they had any ideas to spark what Lisa was saying.
So I would give my 2 cents if it's okay.
Yeah.
So to be honest, relationship is a kind of very interesting topic for me, because that's what exactly started me on the journey to discover my ADHD in the first place. You might be familiar with the book written by Melissa Orlov called The ADHD Effect on Marriage, which was the very first book and the very first time when I was met with ADHD in any form or shape. A little bit of background: me and my wife had a long marriage. We were almost 20 years married, and we had a very rocky relationship. Big love at the start, and after then it waned, and when the everydays kicked in and the everyday problems kicked in, we argued a lot. And of course, both of us see in the other, blame the other, what happened. Eventually, the children obviously affected this type of relationship. We couldn't be as much together and resolve amongst each other, and we distanced each other, and we were on the verge of this divorce many times. Obviously, the other was blamed all the time. She was the problem, I was the problem. It depends on the point of view, until my son's behavior prompted the whole evaluation by the school. And we started to talk about it, that if he has this condition, and this is coming in where what Lizette was talking, where is it coming from that he's exactly like me, he's behaving the same way as me, and he has an ADHD, most likely has an ADHD. Actually, we are in the final, it's a long story, but a final stage of diagnosis. The major thing is, if I am like that, so we looked into that. At first, I was in denial. I mentioned it earlier in an earlier podcast, but I denied it, and eventually my wife pointed it out that, look, this article pointed that to Melissa Orlov's one of the posts on her website. This is exactly us. This is what you do, and this is what I do. Look at it. I was in denial, so I said, "Oh, I read it. Maybe you're just looking into something which you don't even understand," and la 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 la. Denial. And when I read it, I have this realization: oh, this is actually really like us. So that was the whole prompt to look into my own behavior, and it took me about a month and a half until I come from total denial to some sort of acceptance that I might have something like this. And our relationship, which was rocky, and again, many times was on the verge of divorce. There were unique circumstances which kept us together in the first place. We'll get into that stage that if I'm not changing or her changing, we will go for the divorce. With 4 children, I might add. So it's we're not talking about a joyride. And this was the point that I really need to do something to save the marriage. Because so far I just blamed her for the things. She blamed me, obviously. And eventually we get into the point when we had to do something about it. And came in my son's quasi-diagnosis and the realization that he has ADHD. And we looked into it, highly hereditary disorder we're talking about. It was almost a realization that some of the family has it. And I started to look into my own life, my own decisions, my own behavior. And I had to accept it, that ADHD is present in the family because of me.
Yeah.
It took a while, but I have to say now we have a kind of turning point at that time, because we're almost talking like that. Everything before we realize I have ADHD and everything after. Because as soon as she learned and understood ADHD in a high level, she treated my behavior much easier, and she took many of the things beforehand caused a lot of grief and anger much lighter. And I was paying attention, and she warned me when I'm behaving in certain ways. This made our relationship much more smoother, and in many sense much more happier, because we got rid of loads of misunderstandings, loads of arguments, loads of grief, loads of anger, just understanding what's going on. Yeah. Not to mention that we realized she is neurodivergent too, which made the life even more easier. And since then, and that's why I say it's a kind of watershed moment for us, a huge change, a turning point for us since we realized this, because our life improved dramatically and our relationship improved dramatically, just to know that we have what we have. I have ADHD, she has autism. And since then, we work in a much more harmonious way, because she knows I will forget things, and she's not giving out for it, and it's not starting an argument. And I won't start to deny it. I won't start to gaslighting. I won't start to saying that, no, you just imagine you said so, and you didn't say it because I would remember that. Because I know I won't remember that. When I forget things, she's much more forgiving. When I'm getting impulsive, she stops me, and it works in the other way. When she behaves in certain ways, I warn her and give the trigger words, and she stops, and she understands there was a moment there which she shouldn't do. So this type of relationship which we have now improved hugely our relationship, and I think just the fact that I was diagnosed with ADHD saved my marriage. It sounds really happy and everything. It's not happy at all, because there are lots of issues we have to get through, and a neurodivergent family is never a smooth running family at all. But at the same time, Yeah, we went from the verge of divorcing each other and make everyone's life, especially the children's life, a misery. We are actually starting to discovering more and more about ourselves we never thought possible. And we are, I wouldn't say happy, but I'm saying we are nowhere near that misery where we were before. Not much it changed, just the fact we know it. My part on the relationship. We talk about it in details, I guess, but this is the major point which I wanted to bring up with people. Knowing you have it can make a huge difference with in your marriage, in your relationship, romantic or not. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. Parents, I think we're talking about that in later, I guess, because one of my parents definitely won't accept my ADHD, but at the same time, I see it everywhere in the family. I see my grandmother, who's passed away not too long ago. I see it in my mother, my brother, everywhere. And I know two of my children definitely have it too. So
Yeah.
much easier, much easier.
Do you think that change from the way that people perceive you before your diagnosis and when they perceive you after, do you think that's an extremely beneficial thing to relationships? I know you said that your wife is neurodivergent as well, but for a neurotypical person, do you feel like when you come out about your diagnosis or when they're aware of your diagnosis, or maybe they knew you up until your diagnosis, do you feel it's extremely beneficial always for someone to know about it? Or do you think maybe people would play to your weaknesses in that way ever?
It's more or less a personality question. I am extremely open about it. I'm not hiding the fact at all. I'm not putting in their faces, obviously. So I'm not doing a kind of in your face style. But if they ask in, why can't you shut up? I say, I'm sorry, I have this condition. Please apologize. I apologize for my lots of talk and interruptions. And I try to make them understand that sometimes I cannot control these behaviors. I try my best. And since I have my medication, I am much more successful, but at the same time, it's still there. So regarding people generally neurotypicals, most of the people who I met with, maybe I was lucky, were very accepting to that. Funnily enough, the families gets the most backlash because they knew me beforehand and they didn't see me as a neurodivergent person before that. So their transition, which is not my job at all, but it's their problem to deal with, still have the most impacting changes in my life. Some people who I confided that I have ADHD didn't receive it very well. Some people simply saying, yeah, there's nothing wrong with you. You have this is a children, the usual stereotypical myths are coming up. But the most important thing with people who really matter to me, maybe apart from one parent, they all accepted this. And I feel incredibly lucky that I haven't met with this, not even in an official level, with rejection. Maybe I'm just really lucky, but not my doctors, not my place where I'm working with. I confided them because if I'm late with one of the submissions or anything, they needed to know why. I know when I heard that, listen, this is unacceptable, you cannot do this, it's a made up stuff, which made me incredibly thankful and grateful because they accepted it and said, okay, you have it, we'll handle it somehow. That was the most often gut reaction. So either I am very lucky or I see everything in a kind of a pink haze.
No, that sounds like a great experience. I wish I could say everyone was like that, but I know you did mention a parent, which we'll skip over, but I understand that for the most part you have had an extremely beneficial way of interacting with people when you are open about the disorder, which is great to hear. And it kind of sparked a question in me that I wanted to ask, because you were stating about neurotypical people being very understanding, and it just made me think, if you are comfortable talking about it, do you think that the way you interacted with your siblings maybe before a diagnosis is very different than the way you interact with them now? And do you feel that you would be more patient and understanding, or do you think maybe you jump the gun too quick sometimes with them and you forget, that the disorder is there, and that people with ADHD do find certain things more difficult, and we do have our little issues?
Speaking from my experience as a neurotypical sibling, as I stated at the start, or as I've mentioned before, I have two brothers with ADHD. One was diagnosed at 3. And we always, before the diagnosis, I was like, right, little brother's just too loud. He's really annoying, kind of like, I don't have time for this, trying to get used to this whole thing. And then coming home from school one day, my parents sat me and the older brother down and explained, your little brother has this thing called ADHD. Now, this was back when they never heard of such a thing in their life. They grew up in a time where something like this didn't exist. It was like, oh, it's just one of these things that's coming out. It's a new trend, that kind of thing. But when a teacher came in and explained to my mom that she felt that there was something going on, something else going on deep down with my little brother, like he's not just loud, he's not misbehaving on purpose. It's because he just can't sit still. It's not because he's looking for trouble, it's because he can't help it. And when they mentioned ADHD, my mom, I can just remember my mom going, like, what in the world is that? Never heard of that in my entire life. And neither did I until, I can't remember the book, but we were shown a book by, I don't know if it was not a psychologist, I think a therapist that my little brother was brought to. I can't remember the name of it, but it was just to kind of help us be introduced to ADHD because we never heard of it before. And it was kind of to help us, me and my older brother, kind of understand what it was. Because at the time, my older brother wasn't diagnosed. He was diagnosed very, very late in life. He wasn't diagnosed until he was 17. Like, he was just about to graduate school and someone turned around and went, yeah, I think he has it too. But my mom knew deep down that he had it, but she never got to be able to get him diagnosed until that age. But even after after being told that your siblings have this, like ADHD, even then, I personally feel anyway that it didn't change how I felt. I was like, right, I know they have this, but that doesn't explain why they need to annoy me all the time. This sounds horrible, but like, why they have to annoy me all the time, why they have to keep coming into my room and taking things without asking me, and then there's sometimes, like, there was one time that my little brother came into the room, he took something without asking me. I told him, you've no right to come in, this is my personal space and stuff. And he goes, well, I just needed it, I couldn't wait for you to come home. I was like, no, you had to text me, but you were in work, I couldn't get in contact. I was like, no, that's not okay, you shouldn't have done that. And then later on the day, I kind of sat back and I went, right, he couldn't help it in a sense. It wasn't right, he shouldn't have done that. But at the same time, I could understand later on, like you said, I jumped the gun a little bit, and I will admit I have done it. I still do it. Like, no one's perfect, but I do try to understand where he's coming from, where my older brother would be coming from in their daily struggles as well. But at the same time, I myself struggle to understand, because A, B, and C is so simple, but to them it's completely different set of steps to them than it would be for me. For me, it'd be straightforward. For them, they're going one way then the next. It's not a completely straight line for them.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier about patience. I think what you're doing, definitely trying your absolute best to understand, which I think definitely improves relationships with our struggles and our little quirks. But patience, I think, is definitely the most important thing you can have, and it's not something we can always have. And that made me think of like my relationship with my fiance, and he has undiagnosed ADHD, but we both are like, that's just not me diagnosing him. He's in agreement with me on that. And I find myself, even as someone neurodivergent and diagnosed, and who has always been quirky in a sense, or struggled with my own mental health, I'm not as patient with him as I should be. So I guess the way, like you were saying, things didn't automatically change when you found out about a diagnosis. In ways they did. Maybe you'd stop yourself and be more patient, but that underlying frustration can be there, and that isn't something going to
take away. Because speaking as a neurodivergent person, like I can say I still get frustrated by the quirks that my fiance has that he cannot help. It's just the way he is. It is neurodivergence, and I also do a lot of the same things. Maybe we have different habits, different ways of doing things, but he allows for mine and I allow for his to some extent, but it's not always going to be perfect. So I think in saying that you are learning, and that's super important, and also coming on here and even listening to people's takes. I know we're a bit older than your siblings, but it's good to hear about like our perspectives on things, I think. And I was one more question on that. Do you feel passionately, I guess, about the fact that there needs to be more education on this? Because like you were saying, your mum and you maybe didn't know much about it before you found out about your sibling's diagnosis. And then when you did step back and rethink before maybe you jumped the gun and got annoyed, or maybe got overly upset about something. Now you had every right to, with someone coming into your room and taking your stuff, because a reason is not always an excuse. But how do you feel about that sort of situation, with the fact that maybe not everyone knows about this, not everyone knows entering relationships with someone, even familial, platonic, romantic, like what it is? So how do you feel about that?
I think it's very, very important to educate not just family members, but I think it might be important in some aspects to educate children on this, because children with ADHD, autism, they tend to be singled out because they're not, quote, normal. They are neurodivergent. They're not your typical person, but they're just as impressive, just as creative, just as amazing as the next person who doesn't have ADHD. Like I myself, I'm very creative in aspects of writing. I have written a book, self-published on Amazon, but my younger brother wouldn't be as creative in that sense. But he is like brilliant at drawing. He did a YouTube channel for a while. Some people don't understand of how talented that people with ADHD can be, but to just some people who are just looking from the box, looking in through the window, they're not coming through the door and seeing not just the benefits of it, like their creativity. Some people don't see the chaos of it. They don't see the struggles that they have every day. It's so important to educate people, because they're more than just someone who is loud and can't sit still, or like it's very difficult for someone who isn't educated on it to understand this. I've been living with my siblings my whole life. Like one's 16, one's 22, going on 23. I'm still learning. There's still things that I don't understand. And I wish that someone, I wish my siblings' therapist maybe could have brought me in for a session, sat me down and go, look, this is what they struggle with. Do you understand what's going on? Do you have any questions? I didn't have anyone to ask questions because my parents didn't know what was going on themselves. They were learning themselves. But as time goes on, I see people in college. I see my own other family members who suffer with ADHD. And sometimes like, oh yeah, that's because they struggle with this. This is why this is going on. But there's some questions that I'd love to ask, but I don't have anyone who can answer them for me. And sometimes I have to look to the internet. I know we don't always we don't always go to Google for our answers. And it's always best to go to professional help, talk to a therapist or an expert in the likes of this. But that's not always going to be available to people. Some people don't have the access to that information that they would need.
Yeah, 100%. And you're 100% right about that. It definitely needs to be more educated on. Like a lot of other disorders, a lot of other even mental health disorders, I feel like we're always talking about the stigma, but there's such a stigma around it. And I feel like even people in close relationships with people who don't accept the fact that we have a disorder, or even are willing to call it a disorder, they might know enough about the situation to kind of gauge, like our little quirks, to gauge like how to put up with us in a sense. And if they had the right education on these things, if there wasn't such like a underlying negative opinion about disorders, and even saying the word, like I know when I was first diagnosed, I was really ashamed of it, and I think I mentioned that before. Because I know nothing about it except that, like you said, the kids with ADHD were singled out. So I guess even in that sense, as children, the relationships that we further, we should be accepting of everyone, and we definitely should be educated that it's not, yes, it's neurodivergence, yes, it's a disorder, yes, there is a difference to neurotypical people, but we need to be more accepting of that and understanding, because there's so many of us, and there's some in every family. There's probably more than we know about, like Thomas was saying, hereditary. So we definitely just need to be more educated. And even myself, I try and keep up to date about it, because I learn new things about ADHD every day. So how is everyone else meant to know, if they're not living it? But patience is definitely important, and education is 100% important too.
And we definitely need to learn. What I think we should definitely look at, that a child and an adult who has ADHD are fundamentally different in symptoms and problems, because obviously a child don't have to deal with a lot of issues that an adult deal with, and many adults don't have to deal with many issues what children are dealing with. For example, the children generally in the age group where it's first diagnosed, they are very cruel to each other, and that's when they are, as Anya mentioned, single them out. They are made fun of them. They're trying to do all kinds of cruel things to each other, what adults don't have to experience at all, because they are living a much more cognitive state. They're not hurting each other unknowingly. Of course, there's always outlying issues like this, but generally speaking, I have to say that children and adults are much more different. And we have to mention that males and females are very different too. So women are much better at masking. For example, they're much better at hiding their ADHD. Males, like myself, tend to be very hyperactive, while females tend to be more inattentive. So these differences hit a lot of girls, for example, or women. Lisa could talk about it, I think, that they not recognized because they are masking, they're hiding so well behind that mask, or hiding their behavior so well that nobody notices them. While we boys, we don't give a damn. We just go out after our heads. And one last thing which I need to mention, and this is coming back to what I mentioned about parents had no clue. This is true for everywhere. I multiple times heard my parent, who doesn't believe still, 30 or 40 years ago, there were no ADHD whatsoever. People were just, badly behaving, or they had bad parents. And exactly, people blamed many other things and not the problem with dyslexia. The only difference between today and past, that people didn't recognize what were the symptoms of these. We just learned very recently. In their childhood, what happened with an ADHD person? He was the bad guy. He was the one who was disrupting the class. Ergo, he must have been a troublemaker. He must have bad parents. He must have been a lazy one, and so on and so forth. And most of the time, they were many times by the society ostracized, and no wonder they turn to alcoholism, or they starting to become criminals, and so on and so forth. Nowadays, and I'm so happy about that my children are living today, not that time, they are very early can be diagnosed. And from then on, their mindset will be different. I have this, I have to pay attention to these, learn certain behaviors, and so on and so forth. They won't become criminals. They will be much more productive. And it's really important, these factors, which I was just talking about, the child versus adult, male versus female, these are all defining that those people who has this disorder, which I am uncomfortable too with, can live a much fuller and much more balanced life, because the people around them know that, okay, you have these problems, you have these behaviors which we cannot control. Let's go around it. Let's work out something so we can circumvent them and don't have to deal with them, or we don't have to worry about them. And they seeing the person behind the condition. They're not troublemakers, alcoholics, criminals anymore. They are children or adults who struggle with a condition they have no control over.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think Thomas is just explaining my life there, actually. because talking about relationships, I just want to kind of go back to that childhood in school, and also childhood with parents, because childhood in school, being singled out and being different, I actually had a slightly different journey. I was quite lucky that I seemed to mask. It's almost like, I suppose, I seen cool people and thought I'm going to be like them, and managed to do it. And so I always say I was the most uncoolest cool person that was. So I never seen myself that way. But bumping into old friends even say that now. But so I managed to actually mask it and fit in by faking it, I suppose, unintentionally. But that's just what I was just behaving the way I seen other people behave. And I suppose sometimes your interests as well sort of go that way too. So school I got away with, but the problem is behaving like that and masking it is exhausting. So then that's when the emotions would set in. And my poor mother, I mean, she was back then, I just thought it was bonkers. So she was just bonkers to me back then, but I can see it in my mum. But she's of the age where it wasn't really spoke of when I was a child. I was the naughty child. Every lesson, sat outside the classroom, normally with the teachers that didn't get me. The teachers that bantered with me, or kind of, I was really good in their lessons. The others, no hope. And I just couldn't do it. And I never intentionally tried to be naughty. It was never bad stuff. It was normally talking, not sitting still, classic stuff that we would now in children in class, you'd say, I wonder if they need a bit more support, but no, I was deemed as being the naughty child. So eventually I went off the rails. I missed loads of school. I needed a bit of extra support, but wasn't given the right support. Just like, I think you should come in school. Come on, Lisa, you're better than this. We know you can work. We know you can do this. But I was already trying my hardest and it wasn't enough. So how much more could I try? And then, like I was saying about keeping my emotions on, just about managing it in school, obviously behaviours, my emotions were all over the place. I probably, I got myself in a few scuffs, which I'm certainly not proud of. Again, just not being able to explain what I was trying to say, or being misunderstood. So often misunderstanding something, and I'm like, no, I didn't mean it like that. No, you don't get it. That's not what I meant. But then going home, and my mum just got it. She would say something or start, giving me an order, and that's it. My temper was gone. And then that's when our relationship was bad, because like I said before, when we were talking, she's very much like me. So if you've got two people like that, and if she doesn't know why she's doing it, and as a child, I didn't know why I was doing it. It was just seen that she was the bad single parent. I was the kid going off the rails. I eventually got addicted to alcoholism. It nearly killed me. That's a different story there for a different show. But managed to get back on track. But I had to go through all of that before I got the right diagnosis and the right help, and a bit of medication that seems to be doing the trick to just help me function a bit better every day.
Yeah, these stories what I'm talking about, that they will be fewer and fewer because we know more about this condition, and that's why it resonates me too as well. When you're talking about that, you were the naughty child, you were the one who caused trouble all the time, and you didn't do it because you wanted to do bad things. Your intentions are most of the time actually good. You just couldn't control your temper. You just couldn't control your behavior of some sort. You couldn't sit still, or you couldn't stop yourself talking back.
And if it's in
And of
if it's in
course,
here, it comes out here.
yeah,
If it's in the head, it
no
comes out.
thinking.
I was just going to say on that sort of thing, but then you can obviously say whichever you were in the middle of, sorry. We do also have to recognize that when our flaws are to be accepted, our flaws, I guess, in a way, with ADHD, our relationships that we have, our symptoms can definitely affect other people. I know my whole relationships with my family before I was diagnosed and on medication were severely affected. I guess I wasn't to blame, but in a sense, I couldn't blame the people around me for getting fed up with me either. And I think what kind of spurred this thought on was Lisa was saying at one stage during when she was talking, she was saying, my poor mother, and there's two people that are so alike in one space and you're rubbing off each other and you're bouncing off each other in that way. And I do feel kind of like that too, like my poor mother, because I know I was a handful with my ADHD, and like I don't want to excuse myself for the issues I had, but I couldn't obviously deal with them in the right ways. But emotional dysregulation was like a huge thing for me my whole life, and it's still there. So although diagnosis can be great and it helps strengthen our relationships, there's definitely still going to be symptoms that affect other people. And I don't know, it's just something I wanted to bring up because like the people in our lives are patient with us. That's amazing. And it's so important and we deserve that. But also we do have to think about our life before diagnosis, or maybe how we affected others and how we can try and minimize affecting other people in that way.
I think we've just touched on siblings, partners, parents, teachers, colleagues. Like there's so many people. The poor guy who's before us in the shopping queue who just happens to hold us up that extra 10 minutes.
And you just, and you can't hold yourself in, your legs tapping, like your head's running. No, but like this is what I mean. Like we touched on all the positives and like people making, not excuses, I'm really bad with words sometimes, making allowances for us with our symptoms, with things that maybe people don't understand, and that's amazing. But there is also things maybe that aren't so much in our control, but that we have to consider. Maybe the guy in the store or a close friend who gets us on a bad day, or when our symptoms are affecting us highly, that they definitely do affect other people. I know I definitely affect my partner who I live with. Even I affect my dogs when I am having a hyper-focused day and I forget to walk them, or when I'm having a really down day and I'm in ADHD paralysis and I'm affecting everyone around me. I'm not getting my work done. I'm not preparing for the podcast. I'm not replying to my boss. And it's amazing when people are patient with us, but we definitely have to consider in relationships that there is definitely the way that people affect us and then we affect them.
I don't think we, generally speaking, intentionally piss up our partners or anything.
No.
But I'm fully behind you on that we have to take responsibility of what we're doing. And I don't think Lisa and I are actually talking about not taking responsibility of what we did.
Oh, I know.
It just came from a different place. They assumed where it come. And maybe you can fix me on that because she's neurotypical. But funnily enough, the two parents I had, the one which has neurotypical patterns in his behavior, and I thought who is it? My father is that, is the less patient with these ADHD neurodivergent talk, which shows a very interesting thing that my mother, when she heard that I'm diagnosed with ADHD, when I said, I suspect you are the person who I inherited it from, and you inherited it from your mother, she didn't I wouldn't say didn't deny it, but she didn't object to it. She said, no, okay, that's the deal, okay, and she just nodded. She kind of accepted that. I think she somehow, on the bottom of her heart, she knew that something was off of her life too. Maybe not as bad as me, or maybe not as bad as her grandmother, my grandmother, but at the same time, she knew that, yes, I am very impulsive. Yes, I am forgetting things all the time. Yeah, I did things which were a huge mistake just because I forgot to do something. So these typical ADHD symptoms come on, and I think she re-evaluated and accepted more than my neurodivergent father, neurotypical father, who's absolutely straight-faced said that this is a kind of tendency, that these modern illnesses of the mind are just, people are so bored that they cannot, find out anything else, that let's create another minority. He was very close-minded on that. And the difference was stark for me. So I'm not sure, but neurotypicals have much harder time and in a much harder situation to accept us than other neurodivergent people. But maybe I am wrong, so I need to hear the only neurotypical in our little group who can confirm this, because she definitely experienced it firsthand and know a lot about how to cope with this.
I'm just trying to think of what to say now, because what you were saying was, it was going in my head, and then now it's kind of gone a little bit blank. It tends to happen to me sometimes, but no, I can definitely say from the neurotypical point of view that for some people, it did for me anyway, I did find it hard to accept it at first, because to me it was just an excuse for someone to behave badly. I am ashamed to say that, yes, I did think this way. And sometimes I kind of go back and think, right, no, this isn't okay. It's an explanation. I always say that it's an explanation for something, but it's never an excuse. As with anything, I can understand someone with anger management problems, for example. I can understand that they struggle with controlling their anger, but it's not an excuse for them to be horrible to somebody. And not everyone is going to be patient with that. And just from the neurotypical perspective, yes, I can't speak for everybody, but from my perspective, yes, it can be hard to accept and it can take some time. With some people, I still find it hard to accept, right? I need to understand that they can't help it, but at the same time, I am allowed to feel frustrated with things that they've said, things that they've done. But at the same time, if I kind of feel like that I'm not allowed to talk about it, because I don't know, I've never walked a mile in anyone's shoes who's neurodivergent. I don't know what it's like to be neurodivergent. Like, I know both my brothers have therapists. I can put my hand up, I've been to therapy myself for my own personal reasons. And I've come home and my brothers would tell me, oh, I spoke about you in therapy today. And I was like, wait, what did I do? And they go, oh, well, we know that you're struggling at the moment, but now we know what it's like because we're in therapy too. We know that you can talk about some things as well, maybe. And that helped me open up and talk about my personal things, while they may not tell me absolutely everything that goes on their sessions because it's completely confidential. It's up to them. But it kind of sits me back and goes, okay, maybe it's time for me to start accepting that they're not completely different to me after all, because we do share, or everyone struggles with one thing or another, whether they're typical or neurodivergent.
What I was going to say in relation to that was, when you're saying you haven't walked in like a mile in our shoes, you have, like, I guess where I was coming from with how we affect people in different ways, positive and negative, your way of life, your neurotypicalness is completely valid as well. So in whatever way that you feel you're affected, maybe positively or negatively, by your family, by your brothers who are neurodivergent, you also have a right to feel that way. So yeah. I guess what I was trying to come from everyone's perspective in saying that while we take responsibility for our own stuff, people who want to be around us should also give us a little leeway, but also voice their concerns, voice when we hurt them, voice when we forget things and it frustrates them. It's all about communication, because you said maybe that you were afraid to say something because you didn't want to say that you were walking a mile in our shoes, but you have every right to feel the way you do. And we have every right to not be able to control certain symptoms. But communication definitely is a huge thing about being in familial, platonic, or romantic relationships with someone with ADHD, because we may upset people, we may frustrate people, we may make people the happiest people in the world, or like all three of those emotions at once. And I think for neurodivergent people, we need to be communicated with when we are making mess ups or when we are doing things correctly, because we're probably the ones beating ourselves up about both and not realizing maybe our strengths and rather than our weaknesses. So I think it's important to communicate about positive things and negative things. And whatever way you feel around your family, you have every right to feel that way. but they have also every right to try and manage their symptoms. But also, when you're there for them and you understand, and like you said, you share a lot in common, you experience similar things, and if they're going to therapy, that's great, because that will help them manage things. And if you've gone or are going to therapy, that's wonderful too. I'm a big advocate for therapy, to see that you share experiences, but you may view them differently. Yeah, communication, I think. So I wasn't necessarily coming from it in a negative way, saying that we also need to take responsibility for how we affect people, because we can affect people in great ways as well.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything to say on my little statement?
I think I'll just kind of finish off really on what Anya was saying, because I think it is important to know, and there is a big difference, because I work with a lot of children who are neurodivergent. It's important to know what's behaviour and what is actually part of our struggles. I think so, and because especially as children, with learning, and it's really tough, because there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of things that you're trying to understand, especially unwritten rules, you know, those social rules that we're supposed to follow, which we don't always get. So I think it's important to understand. And even now, if I'm told I've done something wrong, the embarrassment, honestly, the level of trying to contain it when you think that you've messed up, you want to please, you don't want to break rules, you want to behave. But like you said earlier, when they're telling you and they've given you really good reasons why they went in your bedroom, sometimes in our head, you know, I can say it to my kids, yes, but I just done it. Yeah, but it's just because, yeah, but because, you know, because I've got good reasons. But you're right, sometimes we just have to be reminded. It's communication again. Communication.
I cannot even tell you how many times we realized with my wife that we miscommunicated. And going back in our relationship, when we analyzed what happened in the past, many times we misunderstood each other. I overreacted something because of my impulsiveness, what she said or did, or she did something what I misrepresented, or she misrepresented what I meant to say or I wanted to do or I behaved with. So misunderstandings and the lack of communication, I think, is one of the single most important cause breaking down relationships. Maybe it's true for neurotypical as well, but in our case, it's almost 100% sure that 90% of the case, miscommunication. We don't ignore them. We don't hate them. We don't avoid them. We are distracted. We don't say things because we are truly mean it. We are just angry for something. Maybe it's not even what they caused. It's maybe something we did earlier in the day and simply just came out when we talked to them. And these things are going in our head. And when Lisa said that she is feeling so embarrassed when she did something wrong, I can feeling guilt and shame for days after I said something trivially small thing to the other, but I thought I offended him so much. For example, I talked with someone just recently and I said something wrong. And in my head, I felt enormous guilt and embarrassment and shame because I thought I offended him deeply. So I was afraid that we never see each other in the same light again. And a couple of days later, I went to him and apologized out of nowhere, which is a weird thing in itself. But I went there and said, I'm sorry I behaved with you last time and so on and so forth. He already forgotten it. He didn't take it absolutely seriously. So there was a huge misunderstanding. I felt, sorry for the word, but shit for days on end for almost nothing. He forgot 10 minutes later. But it can happen in the opposite way. I think I didn't say anything hurtful, but I deeply offend the person. I never see them again because they think I am a jerk and an a-hole who is saying very, very rude things to others. Because that was his impression of me, what I said about. And I don't feel any shame or any embarrassment about it Because in my head, it went through, and no, everything was fine. I didn't say anything offending. I said what I thought, or I think I said what I thought. And I just don't understand why he disappeared and why he don't talk to me. And it happened many times, even with my wife, even with my own children, both ways.
Yeah, I think sometimes we definitely struggle with communication in various ways like that. And then, like you said, our emotional strength, I think, is so high that the guilt and the remorse we feel after doing something wrong is huge. And sometimes it may make us go and over apologize. And I've definitely had people walk away from me because I'm actually too much apologizing or too much emotional, or sometimes we'll retreat away into ourselves and just be guilty for days and days and days and feel shit, like you said. And I feel like the emotional toll that communication with people has on us is huge. Like if we go out and we have a good conversation with a colleague, like for instance in college, I'd be like that, my whole day would be great. The second that someone disagrees with me and communicates negatively with me or gives me even criticism, whether it's constructive or not, that can ruin my whole day. And I just wish my relationships, I guess, with people were more stable in the sense that I had a more stable sense of self, so then I could approach the relationships with a bit more stability, a bit better communication and less emotion, I guess, in a way. So that kind of just resonated with me from what you said about the guilt, and then maybe not realizing when we're too much or realizing when we've done something wrong. Because majority of the time I feel like I beat myself up anyway over every interaction. But sometimes even when you're rethinking every interaction, you still miss the mark and you still don't realize maybe you've, like for me, I've overspoken or I've said something wrong or something too blunt, or maybe I didn't communicate with them properly at all. And maybe I just talked about myself the whole time. And this is something I try to rein in, definitely. And I feel like we all do, because we're constantly told actually that we're over talkers or we're annoying or we're loud. But it doesn't always fix relationships. It doesn't always fix that sense of criticism that we'll always feel from every interaction. I don't know if you guys get that, but that's something that I really, really struggle with. It kind of ties into rejection sensitive dysphoria, but it's more like made up rejection sensitive dysphoria than it is real majority of the time.
It's your self-talk, and so you're affecting your self-worth. So we can really affect our confidence, because just like you guys have both said, what we do is we tend to, because we keep making so many mistakes, like, oh, you're late again, or oh, what do you mean you've lost it, or why can't you just be more organized, or oh, why are we overdrawn on the bank account, or why you got off buying all of this, or all the things that we do. It's really difficult trying to explain them and trying to just let people understand how we feel, because all they're doing is they're just telling us how bad we're being, but we try and say, yeah, but it's not our fault, and they don't get it. It's because we've physically not been able to move for 5 minutes because we're overthinking something, or we're overpacking or overfaffing. I call it messing around before we go. My daughter said it, I've got a faff gap. And I thought that's a really good word for it. That last 10 minutes, which always makes you late, faff gap. But yeah, so a lot of understanding, definitely, and being able to communicate so they do understand what's going on. I think it makes a big difference.
I just want to add something on to that, Lisa. Just one sentence that kind of stuck with me, that you said, like, you don't get it. I think that's the biggest thing for people who are so oblivious to the struggles of ADHD. That's the problem that we would have. It's the lack of understanding, the lack of why they're disorganized, why they have this, why are they, I hate using this, why are they so lazy, why are they not putting the effort in, why are they not motivated enough. It's the lack of understanding that we don't know what it's like. As said before, we don't know what it's like to live in your shoes, what it's like to be in that box. So that's why education is so important, because to remove the lack of understanding and having even just a little bit more where, like, okay, I get it because it's this. I get it now because this is what they're doing. I feel like it could help people with ADHD more, if there's more people out there who have more understanding of what they're going through, especially in like college. Like there's loads of support networks available. Therapy, I know it's helped my older brother. He's not in therapy now because the whole thing with, I don't know what the criteria is now, but once you turn 18, I think because you're out of school, you don't really get the therapy that you do when you're in schools. But as far as I know, he is thriving. Like he's going into his 4th year of apprenticeship and he is excelling. But then I've my younger brother who we can say has a more severe diagnosis, because sometimes his ADHD completely like paralyzes him. He's overthinking of something that he said, or he was overthinking that something that happened in school, and it could be something so minor. This only happened a couple of months ago, but he won this little prize from the school, and it was a big deal for him because it's like, oh my God, this is what I got. This is what I achieved for being so creative. I'm so happy about it. It fell out of the window or something and it broke, and he just completely fell apart. And I know in that moment, I was like, what are you so upset about? Like, why are you so upset about something? Like, it can be fixed. And we explained, we'll call the school, we'll get it fixed, it'll be fine. He went into a complete breakdown. He just could not calm down. He was so upset, getting so worried about, oh my God, what am I going to do? How am I going to get this fixed? How can I fix it before someone else finds out about it? And I remember getting into bed that night and I was thinking, oh my God, like that's why. It's because he can't, it's just so strong emotion over something that to me is so little. But that's where my lack of understanding came in, kind of thing. So like education, always so important.
Saying that though, I'm still learning about myself. I'm still, it's only in the last year or so that I've realised that me sucking my thumb and stroking my pillow is stimming. I just thought that was me just liking my pillow or not wanting to move. I didn't realise that was me actually stuck. And now I'm aware. So I'm still learning about myself. I know I've had a later diagnosis, and some of you have had an earlier diagnosis, but I still think I'm still learning. Yes, definitely awareness does need to be raised, because too many people think it's just the naughty child syndrome or whatever it is, that horrible like saying they used to say back along. But I think more and more people are starting to understand that it's a lot bigger than that, and it does, and also quite often it involves a lot of other things going on. It's not always just one diagnosis, it can be a few other things as well.
I know, this is why I thought it was such like a relevant topic. It's interesting how like we're all so different, but it really is like a shared experience thing.
Just sitting here and listening to everyone's stories from their perspective of it, it's really opened my eyes as well. Even though I'm someone who's lived with people with ADHD, like I said, I'm still learning every single day. And it's just to go out for people listening to the podcast. You could be living with someone and you think you know absolutely everything about ADHD, but then you could listen to this podcast and go, oh, never heard about that before. So I just want to thank everyone again for the opportunity to let me come on, listen to your stories, and speak from my perspective. So thank you so much, guys.
Does anybody else have anything that they want to add to the subject of ADHD and relationships?
I just wanted to add a little, as I usually do. Lisa said a very interesting thing, that you're still learning about yourself. Me and my wife have this little, I wouldn't call it game, it's more about self-awareness interaction. When we do something particularly reminiscent of our condition, and for example, in my case, she recognizes ADHD in it, she's asking, why did you do that? What was the reason you did this? You said that. What did you mean by this when you said that? Or did you forget it? Or you just making out excuses because... So she's pointing it out that that now you're behaving in a very ADHD way.
Yeah.
And I do it with her in the opposite side with her autism. And it works amazingly well. Because when you are facing not criticism, not a condemnation, not a negative emotion, but a curiosity or just raising awareness, what do you do? you realize so many times that, yeah, this is so not me. This was just an impulsive behavior. This was just a blurting out. This was just a flow straight out of my mouth. This was just an emotional reaction to something which I'm not supposed to react at all. Or I misunderstood her interpretation and I overreacted it, so I let the brakes loose. It makes you realize so many times that, yes, this condition is very real. You constantly have to learn about it. You constantly have to regulate yourself. You constantly have to improve your behavior, because it's not just popping a pill and you're done. It's much, much more than that. And as Lisa very astutely, very well said, when you realize you have this and you not do anything about it, that's on you. From then on, no excuse. So you cannot say, I have ADHD, everybody has to accept what I'm doing. If you're not improving on your own behavior, you're not understanding the other point of view, if you don't put your work in it, then it's you, it's not your ADHD.
Yeah.
And I think that made the huge change in my relationships, that I am very open about it to most of my friends. And when they saying I did something what I'm not supposed to, I said something what I'm not supposed to, I reacted somehow, is not appropriate, I am learning from it, and I'm being aware of it. When next time the situation happens, I try to control it, or at least try to misdirect it and not hurting other people.
Yeah, so right. We do learn from it, because, like I said, we do want to improve. We don't want to be horrible, do we? We want to be nice versions of ourselves who can just get on with life and try and do whatever we can to do that.
Yeah, I don't think anyone with ADHD that I know anyway uses it as purposely uses it as an excuse.
Yeah.
We are all looking to make our lives easier, make our lives better ourselves constantly. So
Constantly learning.
The game, or the curiosity game, I guess. Yeah, that's so important, because it's definitely furthering understanding of both people in a relationship, whatever type of relationship that is. And it gives us the chance to be understood, and it gives us the chance to not be judged. And that is really nice, because if we're being upfront with someone about our diagnosis and we're accepting ourselves for what we are, it is important for us to be communicated with, so that we don't make the same mistakes again, so that we understand what our actions make the other people feel, whether it's positive or negative. I don't think anyone that I know goes out there to use ADHD as an excuse. That we are constantly wanting to evolve and learn, and we are constantly learning about ourselves. Like you said, Lisa, that no matter how long we have the diagnosis or how long we don't until we do, that we're always going to be learning, and we're definitely willing. I think everyone that I know with it is definitely willing.
If someone's always blaming ADHD for what they do, they are already suspect for me. That means that either using this condition for their own advantage, or they don't even have it, they just want an excuse to do these things. Thankfully, I met with one person who did this in a certain situation, and I said, yeah, this guy is suspectable not to have it, because he constantly said that, yeah, I'm very, very talkative and I talk you down and I'm smarter than you, but it's ADHD, I can't do anything about it. That was his reactions to things. Instantly, my alarm bell started to ring. Then this guy is something's wrong with him. And it's not ADHD, I mean.
Wanting to fit in sometimes.
Yeah,
somebody who wants to fit in. But that's another talk again, isn't it?
But yeah,
thank you for today. It's been really good. It's been lovely to be invited, and more than happy to come back anytime you want me.
It's a great experience, and it's so nice to meet loads of people in similar situations who have the diagnosis, or maybe are undiagnosed, but who are in our little circle and who have the same experiences. So it's lovely, and thank you so much for both of you to come on. Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and thank you to everybody who came on today. It's really nice to have all different perspectives, and I just really enjoyed talking to everyone today. It's definitely a topic that was very close to my heart, and it's really important to talk about how in relationships there's two people, every type of relationship, and it's just really nice to see all different perspectives on that. So yeah, thank you to ADHD Ireland for letting me do this podcast. I'm really happy to be here, and I hope that you guys will join me on a further episode. So that is episode 3. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Let's Chat, ADHD Ireland's first podcast hosted by me, Lauren McBride. You can find us on Instagram at ADHD Ireland, and I'm on there too, at Her Thoughts in Bright Colours. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we'd love to hear your feedback and opinions on the topics covered each week. Sending positive vibes until we chat again.